There is a place where stone meets water, where the earth itself seems to breathe, where twice each day the sea retreats and returns with a force that locals say matches the speed of a galloping horse. A granite island rises from the tidal flats of Normandy, crowned with Gothic spires that pierce the sky, surrounded by quicksands that have claimed countless lives over the centuries. From a distance, it appears almost to float, a pyramid of human ambition balanced on a needle of stone, defying both gravity and the ocean that has tried for over a millennium to reclaim it. Mont Saint-Michel. The name itself carries weight. Mount Saint-Michael, named for the Archangel who commands the armies of heaven, who weighs souls in the balance, who stands at the threshold between earth and paradise. It is one of France's most iconic images, instantly recognizable even to those who have never set foot in Europe. A silhouette that has adorned countless photographs and paintings, a destination that draws over 3 million visitors annually, a place that somehow manages to be both wildly popular and genuinely extraordinary, both tourist spectacle and authentic medieval masterwork. But before we can understand what Mont Saint-Michel has become, we must understand where it stands. We must speak of the bay that surrounds it, of the tides that define it, of the quicksands that make it dangerous. We must understand the physical reality of this place, the geology and hydrology, and the simple, terrifying fact that the sea comes in fast here, faster than anywhere else in Europe, racing across the tidal flats at speeds that can catch the unwary, that have trapped and drowned people within sight of safety, within sight of the Mont itself, standing serene and untouchable on its stone foundation. The Bay of Mont Saint-Michel is vast, some 500 square kilometers of tidal flats, sand and mud and channels that appear and disappear with the rhythm of the tides. At low tide, the sea retreats far from the Mont, leaving it standing on what appears to be a desert of sand, crisscrossed by streams and puddles, extending to the horizon in every direction. The bay floor is not flat. It undulates, rises and falls, creates hollows and mounds, and in certain areas where fresh water from rivers mixes with salt water from the sea, where the sand is a particular grain size, where the water table sits at just the right level, the sand becomes something else. It becomes quicksand. True quicksand is not the Hollywood version, not a pit that swallows people whole in seconds. It is more insidious, more patient. It is sand saturated with water, where the water pressure is high enough that the sand grains are suspended, held apart rather than settled together. When you step on it, it behaves like a liquid. Your foot sinks. If you panic and struggle, you sink further, not because the quicksand is pulling you down, but because your thrashing drives you deeper into the saturated sand. If you stay calm, if you move slowly, you can extract yourself. But if you are caught by the returning tide while mired in quicksand, calm is difficult to maintain. The water is coming, the sea is racing toward you across the flats, and you are stuck, unable to run, unable to free yourself quickly enough. This has happened many times over the centuries. People have died in the bay within sight of Mont Saint-Michel, caught by quicksand and tide, their screams echoing across the flats, rescuers unable to reach them in time. The deaths are recorded in chronicles and local histories, are part of the dark legend of the place, part of why medieval pilgrims considered reaching Mont Saint-Michel safely to be miraculous, worthy of the Archangel's protection. The tides here are extraordinary. The tidal range, the difference between high and low tide, can exceed 14 meters during spring tides when the sun and moon align and their gravitational pulls combine. This is among the highest tidal ranges in the world, and the geography of the bay amplifies the effect. The bay is shallow, sloping gradually, so the rising water spreads across a vast area quickly.
The incoming tide creates a tidal bore in some conditions, a visible wave of water rushing up the bay, advancing at speeds that can reach 10 kilometers per hour, fast enough that a person running cannot outpace it for long. The locals have a saying, "The tide comes in faster than a horse can gallop." This is hyperbole, but not by much. On a spring tide, with the right wind conditions, the advance of the water across the flats is visibly rapid, a moving line of sea that transforms the landscape within hours, from sand to ocean. Stand at the base of Mont Saint-Michel at low tide, and you can walk a kilometer or more onto the flats. Return 6 hours later, and you will be underwater, the same spot covered by meters of Atlantic Ocean, the sea lapping at the walls of the island.
This tidal rhythm has defined Mont Saint-Michel since before it was Mont Saint-Michel, since before there were buildings on the granite rock, since before there were people to name it. The stone itself, a granite outcrop, a plug of ancient volcanic rock harder than the surrounding sedimentary stones that have eroded away over millions of years, has stood in this bay for eons, a single finger of hard stone pointing upward, surrounded by softer rocks that the sea has worn away, creating the tidal flats we see today. But the bay has not always been as it is now. Go back far enough in time, 10,000 years, 20,000 years, and the English Channel was not fully formed. The sea level was lower, the bay was dry land. There were forests here, solid ground, a landscape that bears no resemblance to the current tidal flats. As the last ice age ended, as glaciers melted and sea levels rose, the ocean advanced, flooded the low-lying areas, turned valleys into bays, isolated high points into islands. Mont Saint-Michel's granite rock became an island gradually over centuries and millennia as the sea claimed more of the surrounding land. But even into the early medieval period, by the 6th and 7th centuries CE, the process was not complete. There are records suggesting that at very low tides, in very calm weather, it was possible to walk dry-shod from the mainland to the Mont, or nearly so, using knowledge of the sandbanks and channels. The transformation from occasional island to permanent island to the fully tidal situation we see today has been a process, a conversation between stone and sea that continues even now. The quicksand adds another dimension to the bay's danger. It forms where conditions are exactly right, where fresh water from the Couesnon and Sea and Sélune rivers mixes with salt water from the ocean, where the sand has the right grain size and composition, where the tidal action creates zones of saturation. These zones shift, move with the tides and seasons. There is no permanent map of where the quicksand is because it is not permanent. A path that was safe yesterday might be deadly today. Only those who know the bay intimately, who walk it regularly, who understand its moods and patterns, can navigate safely. For centuries, there were guides, passeurs, who made their living leading pilgrims across the bay. This was essential work, dangerous and demanding, requiring intimate knowledge not just of the bay's geography, but of the tide schedules, the weather patterns, the seasonal variations. A passeur needed to know where the quicksand was on any given day, needed to be able to read the sand by sight and by probing with a staff, needed to keep track of the tide's position even when the shoreline was kilometers away and out of sight. A mistake could kill everyone in their charge. The pilgrims trusted these guides with their lives, literally. They followed them across the flats, sometimes for hours, wading through water, squelching through mud, carefully avoiding areas the guide pointed out as dangerous. And they paid for this service, paid well, because the alternative was attempting the crossing alone and likely dying. The passeurs held a monopoly on safe passage, sanctioned by church and state, and they guarded their knowledge jealously, passing it from generation to generation within families, a hereditary profession based on accumulated understanding of the bay's lethal moods.
The granite rock that would become Mont Saint-Michel was known in pre-Christian times. It had a name, Mont Tombe, the Mount, the Tomb. Some sources suggest it was a burial site, a sacred place for the Celtic peoples who inhabited this region before Roman conquest, before Christianity. Granite outcrops often held spiritual significance for Celtic cultures. They were seen as thin places, locations where the boundary between the material world and the spirit world was permeable, where gods and ancestors could be encountered. Whether this specific rock was a major sacred site or simply a notable landmark is unclear from the historical record. What is clear is that by the early medieval period, by the 6th and 7th centuries CE, there was a Christian presence in the region, small churches and monasteries scattered across Normandy, the new religion layering itself over older beliefs, adopting sacred sites and reinterpreting them through Christian theology. And then, in the year 708, something happened that would transform this isolated granite rock into one of medieval Christianity's most important pilgrimage sites. The Bishop of Avranches, a man named Aubert, had a dream or a vision. The historical sources are not entirely clear about the distinction, and perhaps to medieval minds there was no meaningful difference. Aubert was visited, in sleep or waking trance, by the Archangel Michael. The archangel commanded him to build a church on the granite rock in the bay, to create a sanctuary dedicated to Michael, to create a place of prayer and pilgrimage.
Aubert, the story goes, was hesitant. This was not a simple commission. Building on the rock would be difficult, dangerous, expensive. The tides, the quicksand, the isolation, all of this made the project seem impractical, if not impossible. Aubert delayed, hoping perhaps that the vision would not recur, that he could avoid this monumental task. But the archangel was persistent. He appeared to Aubert again, repeated the command, and when the bishop still hesitated, Michael took direct action. He pressed his finger into Aubert's skull, creating a hole, a physical mark that could not be ignored or explained away. The message was clear: build the church or face divine displeasure. Aubert, convinced by this tangible evidence, the wound on his head, the pain of it, capitulated. He would build as commanded. Whether this story is literally true, whether Aubert actually had a skull injury that he interpreted as angelic intervention, or whether the tale is entirely legendary, created after the fact to give divine sanction to the church's construction, is impossible to determine at this historical distance. What matters is that a church was built, that work began on Mont Tombe in 708 CE, and that this marked the beginning of Mont Saint-Michel as we know it. The first structure was modest, an oratory, a small building for prayer, circular in plan, constructed using whatever materials were available locally. Getting building materials to the rock would have been challenging even then, requiring transport across the tidal flats during low tide, a narrow window of opportunity determined by the sea. The work would have been dangerous, requiring knowledge of the tides and quicksand, requiring faith that the effort was worthwhile. But the church was built, and immediately it became a pilgrimage site. The dedication to the Archangel Michael, combined with the dramatic location and the story of Aubert's vision, drew people. Pilgrimage was central to medieval Christian practice, the journey to sacred sites, the endurance of hardship in service of faith, the seeking of miracles and absolution. Mont Saint-Michel offered all of this. The journey across the bay was dangerous, a trial in itself. The destination was dramatic, spiritually charged, and miracles were reported, healings, visions, interventions by the Archangel himself. The site grew. Over the following decades and centuries, the original oratory was expanded, replaced, rebuilt. Each generation added to the structure, made it more substantial, more capable of housing the growing number of pilgrims. By the 9th century, a more significant church existed on the rock, along with buildings to house monks and provide shelter for pilgrims. The critical development came in 966,
when Richard I, Duke of Normandy, invited Benedictine monks from the Abbey of Saint-Wandrille to establish a monastery on Mont Saint-Michel. This formalized the religious community, gave it structure and resources, connected it to the broader Benedictine network. The monks brought with them the rule of Saint Benedict, a framework for monastic life that emphasized prayer, work, and study, a rhythm of daily observance that would characterize Mont Saint-Michel for the next 8 centuries. With the monks came expertise in construction, in manuscript illumination, in the management of estates and resources. The monastery became not just a pilgrimage destination, but a center of learning and economic power. It owned lands on the mainland, received donations from pilgrims and nobles, accumulated wealth that could be invested in building. And build they did. The Normans were master builders. The same architectural energy that would produce the great cathedrals of Normandy, Rouen, Bayeux, Caen, was applied to Mont Saint-Michel. In the 11th century, construction began on a Romanesque abbey church, a structure of massive scale given the limited space available on the granite rock. The church was oriented east-west in traditional Christian fashion, which meant it had to be built along the length of the rock, which meant creating a platform, extending the usable space through crypts and supports, essentially building a mountain on top of the mountain. This was engineering at the limits of medieval capability. The granite rock is not flat, not level, not conveniently shaped for building. It is irregular, sloping, offering limited space at the summit. To create a church of significant size, the builders had to create an artificial platform, had to construct crypts and undercrofts that would support the weight of the church above, had to anchor everything to the living rock below. And they had to transport materials. Stone for construction, limestone, not the local granite, had to be brought from quarries on the mainland, had to be floated across the bay on boats or rafts during high tide, or dragged across the flats during low tide. Timber for scaffolding and roofing, iron for tools and supports, food and supplies for the workers. Everything had to cross the bay, had to be hauled up the slope of the island, had to be lifted to the working level by human and animal power.
The construction took decades. Generations of monks and workers lived and died during the building process, and the result was extraordinary. A Romanesque church perched on a granite rock in a tidal bay, its walls rising directly from the stone, its tower visible for miles in every direction, a statement of faith and ambition that seemed almost to challenge the elements that surrounded it. But the Normans were not finished. In the early 13th century, after a fire had damaged portions of the abbey, a major reconstruction began, this time in the Gothic style that was sweeping across France. The result, completed around 1228, is known as La Merveille, the marvel, and it lives up to its name. This is the 3-level monastery complex on the north face of the Mont, a vertical arrangement of rooms stacked impossibly on the slope, supported by flying buttresses and corbels, each level serving a different function, the whole thing appearing to defy both gravity and common sense. The lowest level contains storage rooms and the alms room where food was distributed to the poor. The middle level houses the Great Hall and the Guests' Hall, large rooms for receiving and entertaining important visitors. And the top level, the uppermost reach of human construction on this rock, holds the cloister, a serene garden courtyard surrounded by arcades, open to the sky, a space for contemplation and prayer, built on a stone platform 80 meters above the bay, supported by the structure below, hanging in space, impossible and real. The cloister is perhaps the most remarkable space in all of Mont Saint-Michel. To reach it, you climb through the abbey, ascending staircases and passing through various chambers, and then you step out into this open courtyard, this garden in the sky. Slender columns hold up the arcade roof, carved with delicate foliage, creating a rhythm of light and shadow. In the center, grass and plants grow in soil that has been carried up here, that exists on a platform of stone held aloft by medieval engineering. The sky is overhead, unobstructed,
and the silence is profound despite the crowds of tourists usually present. It is a space that seems to exist outside normal geography, outside normal rules, a place that should not be where it is, but undeniably is. Walking through Mont Saint-Michel, from the base of the island to the summit, is to experience medieval architecture in its full vertical glory. The island itself is small, the circumference at the base is less than a kilometer, but the vertical dimension is remarkable. From the tidal flats to the top of the Abbey spire is a rise of 155 meters, and almost all of that vertical space is filled with architecture, with buildings stacked and nested and cantilevered, creating a dense three-dimensional city that rises like a mountain. There is essentially one street on Mont Saint-Michel, appropriately called La Grande Rue, the Great Street. It winds up the slope from the main gate, narrow and steep, lined with buildings that date from various centuries, from the medieval period to the 19th century. These buildings are narrow, typically 3 or 4 stories tall, pressed tightly together, their facades directly on the street. The ground floors are now shops and restaurants, catering to tourists, selling souvenirs and crepes and cider. The upper floors are residences or hotels, though fewer people live on the Mont now than in previous centuries. The street climbs through 3 major gates, the Boulevard Gate, the King's Gate, and finally the third gate that opens onto Le Grand Degré, the great staircase that climbs the final steep approach to the Abbey itself. Each gate was a defensive feature, capable of being closed and defended, making the approach to the summit a gauntlet that any attacker would have to fight through step by step. Because Mont Saint-Michel was not just a monastery, it was also a fortress. Its location, surrounded by treacherous tides and quicksand, made it naturally defensible. An attacking army could not approach at high tide. The Mont was an island, accessible only by boat, and boats could be repelled by defenders on the walls. At low tide, attackers would have to cross the quicksand-laced flats, vulnerable to arrows and stones from above, and even if they reached the walls, they faced fortifications specifically designed to repel assault. This defensive capability became critical during the 100 Years' War, the long conflict between England and France that raged from 1337 to 1453. Much of Normandy fell to English control during this war, but Mont Saint-Michel never did. It was besieged, attacked multiple times, but the combination of natural defenses and strong fortifications kept it French throughout the war. The Mont became a symbol of resistance, a place where French sovereignty persisted even as English armies occupied the surrounding countryside. The English tried to take it. They established a siege in 1423, built their own fortification on a small rock nearby named Tomblaine, and attempted to starve the Mont into submission, but the siege failed. Supplies reached the Mont by sea during high tide, slipping past the English blockade. The defenders held, shooting arrows and dropping stones on anyone who attempted to approach at low tide. After years of siege, the English gave up, withdrew, and Mont Saint-Michel remained French. This military success added another dimension to the Mont's legend. It was not just a holy site, not just a pilgrimage destination, but also a symbol of national resistance, a place that had defied invasion, that had remained unconquered. When Joan of Arc wrote to the English demanding they leave France, she specifically mentioned Mont Saint-Michel as an example of French places they could not take. The association between the Mont and French national identity was forged during this period and persists to this day.
But even fortresses and monasteries face threats that have nothing to do with armies. Fire was a constant danger in medieval buildings, with their timber roofs and their lighting by candles and oil lamps. Mont Saint-Michel burned multiple times over the centuries, in 992, in 1112, in 1138, in 1204. Each fire destroyed portions of the abbey, required reconstruction, gave the monks an opportunity to rebuild in newer styles, to expand, to improve. The history of Mont Saint-Michel's architecture is partly a history of its fires, of destruction and resurrection, of each generation leaving its mark on the structure.
But the most profound threat to Mont Saint-Michel came not from fire or siege, but from the French Revolution. In 1789, when revolutionary fervor swept France, monasteries were particular targets. They represented the old order, the alliance between church and monarchy, the concentration of wealth and power in religious institutions. The revolutionaries closed the monasteries, seized their lands and wealth, expelled the monks. Mont Saint-Michel's monks were expelled in 1791. The Abbey, which had housed a religious community continuously since 966, was emptied, its treasures confiscated, its library dispersed. And then, in 1793, the revolutionary government found a new use for the Mont. It became a prison. This was perhaps the lowest point in Mont Saint-Michel's history. The Abbey church, the cloister, the great halls, all these spaces dedicated to prayer and contemplation were converted to cells, workshops, administrative offices. Prisoners were housed in the crypts, in the monks' dormitory, in any space that could be secured. The Abbey's name was officially changed to Mont Libre, Free Mount, erasing the saint's name, rejecting the religious associations. The prisoners held here were political, opponents of the revolution, priests who refused to swear loyalty to the new government, royalists, later opponents of Napoleon. They were kept in miserable conditions, crowded into spaces never designed for such use, poorly fed, subject to brutal discipline. Some died here, buried in unmarked graves. The Mont that had been a place of pilgrimage and prayer became a place of suffering and despair. The prison use continued through the revolutionary period, through Napoleon's empire, through the restoration of the monarchy, into the mid-19th century. For over 70 years, Mont Saint-Michel was a prison. The buildings deteriorated. Prison authorities had no interest in maintaining architectural integrity, no resources for proper upkeep. Portions of the structure collapsed. The beauty of La Merveille was obscured by prison modifications. The Gothic windows were bricked up, the cloister used as a prison yard. But the Mont was not forgotten. Writers and artists, particularly the Romantic movement of the early 19th century, began to take interest in medieval architecture, to see value in Gothic buildings that previous generations had dismissed as barbaric. And some of them visited Mont Saint-Michel, saw what it had been and what it had become, and were appalled. Victor Hugo, one of France's greatest writers, was among those who advocated for saving Mont Saint-Michel. In 1836, he published an article demanding that the prison be closed, that the Mont be restored, that this architectural treasure be preserved rather than destroyed by neglect and misuse. Hugo was not alone. A growing preservation movement argued that France's medieval buildings were national heritage, that they should be protected and maintained, that allowing them to decay was cultural vandalism. The prison was finally closed in 1863. The last prisoners were removed, the modifications were gradually undone, and restoration work began. This was the era of Viollet-le-Duc and other restoration architects who worked on Gothic buildings across France. Some of their work at Mont Saint-Michel was careful and scholarly, based on studying what remained and on historical records. Other work was more speculative, reconstructing based on what the restorers thought should have been there rather than what definitely was. The result is that the Mont Saint-Michel we see today is partly medieval original, partly 19th century restoration, partly 20th century intervention. Determining which is which requires expertise, requires careful examination of building techniques and materials. But for most visitors, this layering is invisible. What they see is a Gothic masterwork, a medieval abbey on a tidal island, architecture of surpassing beauty and ambition. That this beauty is partly authentic and partly reconstituted does not necessarily diminish it. The vision is compelling, regardless of which stones are original and which are replacements. The restoration work in the late 19th century coincided with another major change to Mont Saint-Michel, the construction of the causeway. In 1879, a raised roadway was built connecting the island to the mainland, making it accessible regardless of tide, allowing people to walk or drive to the Mont without needing to wait for low tide or hire a boat or risk the quicksand. This was seen at the time as progress, as improvement. No longer would pilgrims risk their lives crossing the bay. No longer would the Mont be isolated. The causeway brought easy access, brought more visitors, brought economic benefits to the island and the surrounding towns. It was celebrated, seen as engineering triumph. But the causeway had unintended consequences. By blocking the natural tidal flow around the island, it changed the hydrology of the bay. Water and sediment that used to flow freely around the Mont now accumulated on one side of the causeway. Gradually, over decades, the bay began to silt up. Sand accumulated around the base of the island. At very low tides, there was hardly any water visible. The Mont appeared to sit on dry land rather than in water. The tidal island was losing its island character, was being slowly connected to the mainland by accumulating sediment.
This silting was noticed and documented, but for many decades, little was done about it. The causeway was convenient, was popular, and reversing it seemed impractical. The Mont remained accessible, remained one of France's premier tourist destinations, drew increasing numbers of visitors. Why fix what wasn't broken? But to those who loved the Mont, who understood its history and its essential character, the silting was a tragedy. Mont Saint-Michel was supposed to be an island, was defined by its relationship with the tides, with the danger and drama of the bay. Making it a peninsula diminished it, made it ordinary, removed the element of the sublime that had always been part of its appeal. By the late 20th century, the siltation had progressed to the point where action was demanded. Studies were commissioned, engineering solutions were proposed. The conclusion was radical. The causeway must go. To restore Mont Saint-Michel's island character, to bring back the tides, to stop the silting, the causeway had to be removed and replaced with something that would not block tidal flow. The project began in 2006. It was massive in scope, not just removing the old causeway, but constructing a new bridge, building a dam across the Quesnon River to regulate water flow, creating new parking areas and visitor facilities on the mainland, redesigning the entire approach to the Mont. The cost was over 200 million euros. The timeline was nearly a decade, and the goal was to return Mont Saint-Michel to the sea, to restore the tides, to make it once again the island it had always been meant to be. The causeway was demolished. In its place, a light and elegant bridge was constructed, narrow enough that water could flow around it, high enough that tides could pass beneath it. The bridge extends most of the way to the Mont, but stops short, leaving the final approach exposed to the tides, ensuring that at very high tides, the Mont is once again surrounded by water, truly an island once more. The dam on the Quesnon River is more subtle but equally important. It holds back water at high tide, then releases it in a controlled flush at low tide, creating artificial tidal currents that help scour sediment away from the Mont. The system mimics natural processes, uses the energy of the tides themselves to clean the bay, to push back against the silting that had been accumulating for over a century. The project was completed in 2015. The new bridge opened, the old causeway was gone, and for the first time in over 130 years, the tides flowed freely around Mont Saint-Michel. At the highest tides, the Mont is once again surrounded by water, cut off from the mainland, accessible only by the bridge that rises above the waves. The transformation is not just functional, but aesthetic. The Mont looks like an island again, feels like an island, reclaims its essential character. Walking to Mont Saint-Michel now, across the new bridge, you experience something closer to what medieval pilgrims experienced. You approach across water, or across sand still wet from the retreated tide, and the Mont rises before you, dramatic and isolated, a vertical city on a stone foundation, crowned with Gothic spires. The bridge is modern, certainly, sleek concrete and steel, designed to be as visually unobtrusive as possible, but it returns something essential that had been lost, restores the drama and the danger, if only symbolically, of reaching the Mont. The island itself remains a strange hybrid of religious site, historical monument, and tourist destination. The Abbey at the summit is nominally a church again. Monks returned in 2001,
members of the monastic fraternities of Jerusalem, a Catholic community that focuses on urban ministry and hospitality. They maintain a presence in the Abbey, celebrate Mass, keep alive the tradition of religious observance that has existed here for over 1,300 years. But they are few in number, and their religious activities are dwarfed by the tourist activities that dominate the island. Over 3 million people visit Mont Saint-Michel annually. On busy summer days, the narrow street is packed with tourists, shoulder-to-shoulder crowds shuffling up the slope, queuing to enter the Abbey, taking photographs, buying souvenirs. The shops along Grande Rue sell everything from postcards to medieval costumes to local Normandy specialties, cider, calvados, butter cookies. It is relentlessly commercial, often overwhelmingly crowded, a place where the medieval atmosphere is constantly undercut by the realities of mass tourism. Yet the architecture remains extraordinary. Even seen through crowds, even commercialized and touristified, the Mont retains its power. The Gothic stonework, a vertical stacking of buildings, the interplay of light and shadow, the sheer ambition of building such a complex structure in such an impossible location, all of this still impresses, still moves people, still justifies the visit despite the crowds and commercialism. And there are ways to experience the Mont with fewer people. Visit in winter, on a weekday, ideally during marginal weather, and you might find the island relatively quiet. Arrive at dawn or linger until dusk when day trippers have left and the island returns to something approaching tranquility. These moments offer glimpses of what the Mont might have felt like in earlier eras: empty streets, silent stone, the wind off the bay, the cry of seabirds, the slap of waves against the walls. The Abbey itself, entered through the north terrace and reached by climbing the Grand Degree staircase, reveals its architecture gradually. You pass through a series of chambers, each impressive in its own right: the guard room with its massive pillars, the alms room where monks distributed food to the poor, the guests' hall with its elegant vaulted ceiling. You climb stairs, pass through doorways, ascend through the vertical structure of the building until you reach the church at the summit.
The church is Romanesque at its base, the original 11th century construction, but Gothic in its upper portions, rebuilt after the 12th century fire. The nave is relatively simple, austere even, but the effect is powerful. Light enters through windows high in the walls, creating a sense of height and transcendence. The choir at the eastern end is where the monks would have gathered for daily prayers, singing the offices, maintaining the rhythm of liturgical life that defines Benedictine monasticism. And beyond the church is the cloister, La Merveille's crowning achievement, that impossible garden in the sky. To stand in the cloister is to experience medieval architecture at its most refined, most contemplative. The scale is human, intimate, designed for quiet movement and meditation. The carved columns are works of art, each capital different, decorated with foliage and figures, requiring close examination to appreciate. The open center admits light and air, creates a space that feels both sheltered and exposed, both of the earth and elevated above it. Descending from the cloister through the rest of La Merveille, you pass through the refectory, where monks took their meals, a long, narrow room with windows cunningly placed to seem to bring in more light than they actually do, creating an atmosphere of illumination despite the limited actual window space. You pass through the crypts and undercrofts, massive vaulted spaces that support the weight of the rooms above, engineering made into architecture, function transformed into beauty. And everywhere there is stone. Granite from the island itself, limestone brought from the mainland, each block cut and placed by medieval masons, fitted together with precision, joined with mortar, assembled into arches and vaults and walls. The labor involved in creating Mont Saint-Michel is almost incomprehensible. Millions of individual stones, each quarried, shaped, transported across the bay, hauled up the slope, lifted into position, secured.
Decades of continuous work, generations of craftsmen, all contributing to a project that most would never see completed. The question of why build such a structure in such a location, why invest such immense resources and labor, has multiple answers. Faith is the obvious one. This was a holy site, dedicated to a powerful archangel, attracting pilgrims who brought both spiritual energy and material donations. Building an impressive church and monastery was an act of devotion, a way of honoring God and the archangel, of creating a physical space worthy of the spiritual forces it housed. But there were also political and economic motivations. A grand abbey brought prestige to its founders and patrons, the dukes of Normandy and later the kings of France who supported its construction. It demonstrated power, wealth, cultural sophistication. It attracted pilgrims, and pilgrims brought money, supported an entire economy of guides, innkeepers, merchants. Mont Saint-Michel was a destination, and destinations generate wealth. And there was probably also simply human ambition, the desire to build something extraordinary, to achieve something that seemed impossible. Medieval masons and architects were highly skilled, took pride in their work, competed to create more impressive structures. Mont Saint-Michel was a challenge, a test of their abilities, and rising to that challenge was its own reward. The result is a palimpsest, a document written over many times, each generation adding their contribution, modifying what came before. The Mont we see today contains elements from the 11th century, from the 13th, from the 15th, from the 19th century restorations, from 20th century interventions. It is not a pristine medieval artifact, but a living building, changed and adapted over time, reflecting the needs and aesthetics of each era that has maintained it. This layering is perhaps most visible in the village portion of the island, in the buildings that line Grand Rue. Some date to the medieval period. You can identify them by their narrow windows, their thick walls, their construction methods. Others are 16th or 17th century, Renaissance features, larger windows, different proportions. Still others are 19th century, built during the Restoration period when Mont Saint-Michel was being revived as a tourist destination. The village is a compressed history of French architecture, each building a time capsule, the whole street a chronology in stone. Living on Mont Saint-Michel today is unusual, to say the least. Fewer than 50 people maintain permanent residence on the island, a number that has declined steadily over the past century. Those who remain are mostly involved in tourism, running the hotels and restaurants, selling souvenirs, maintaining the historical buildings. It is not an easy life. Everything must be brought to the island: food, supplies, furniture, equipment. There are no cars on the island proper. Transport is by foot or by small vehicles for deliveries. Waste must be removed. Utilities must be maintained. All the mundane logistics of daily life must be managed in an environment that is both historically precious and physically constrained.
Children growing up on Mont Saint-Michel attend school on the mainland. There is no school on the island itself. Residents commute daily across the bridge, live between two worlds, the extraordinary and the ordinary, the medieval and the modern. There is probably a sense of privilege, of living in a place unique in all the world, but also perhaps a sense of being imprisoned, of living in a museum, of having every aspect of life constrained by tourism and preservation requirements. The tension between preservation and use, between keeping Mont Saint-Michel as an authentic historical site and allowing it to function as a living community, is ongoing and perhaps unresolvable. Every modification, every new piece of infrastructure, every decision about how to manage the visitor flow or where to place utilities requires balancing competing values. Preserve too strictly, and the site becomes lifeless, a museum piece, loses its vitality.
Modify too freely, and the historical integrity is compromised. The very qualities that make the Mont worth preserving are eroded. Tourist management attempts to walk this line carefully. The Abbey is maintained as both monument and church, hosting both tourists and religious services. The village is allowed to function commercially, but within strict guidelines about appropriate uses and modifications. The natural environment of the bay is being restored while still accommodating millions of visitors annually. It is complex, requires constant negotiation, satisfies no one completely, but perhaps serves the site reasonably well. The future of Mont Saint-Michel depends partly on factors beyond anyone's control. Climate change will affect the bay. Rising sea levels, changing storm patterns, alterations to tidal patterns. The Mont has survived many changes in its long history, but the rate of change now may be unprecedented. If sea level rise is dramatic, the tidal dynamics of the bay could shift significantly, affecting erosion patterns, siltation, even the structural integrity of buildings if their foundations are undermined. Tourism pressures will continue and likely increase. As global wealth grows, as travel becomes easier, more people will want to visit iconic sites like Mont Saint-Michel. Managing this demand without degrading the experience or damaging the site will require careful planning, possibly limiting numbers, certainly investing in infrastructure and management. And there is the question of meaning. What does Mont Saint-Michel mean in an increasingly secular age? For medieval pilgrims, it was straightforward, a holy site, a place to encounter the divine, to seek miracles, to fulfill religious obligations. For modern visitors, the motivations are more varied and often more secular. Historical interest, aesthetic appreciation, tourism bucket list completion. Does this matter? Is the site diminished if most visitors are there for photographs rather than prayer? Perhaps not. Beauty and architectural achievement have value independent of religious belief. The Mont speaks to human capability, to what we can accomplish when we combine vision, skill, resources, and persistence. It is a monument to medieval civilization, certainly, but also to human civilization broadly, to our capacity to create meaning through building, to make statements in stone that outlast us by centuries. And it remains genuinely impressive. Stand at the base and look up at the Gothic spires rising 155 meters above you, and you feel something. Awe, wonder, smallness in the face of such achievement. Walk through the Abbey and trace the development of medieval architecture from Romanesque to Gothic. See the evolution of building techniques and aesthetic ambitions. Experience a high tide, watch the water race across the flats and surround the Mont, and understand why people called this place miraculous, why they believed it was protected by divine power. The Mont endures. It has survived 1,300 years of weather, warfare, fire, neglect, imprisonment, mass tourism. The stones remain, the architecture persists, the tides still flow. The granite rock that forms its foundation will outlast any human structure built upon it. When the Abbey has finally crumbled, when the last stones have fallen, the rock will still be there, surrounded by the bay, waiting, perhaps, for the next chapter in its long story. But that is geological time, spans of millennia and millions of years. On human scales, the Mont is likely to persist much as it is for centuries to come. Barring catastrophe, barring dramatic changes to the bay or to human civilization, the Mont will continue to stand, will continue to draw visitors, will continue to inspire wonder. It will require constant maintenance. Stone weathers, structures settle. Preservation is an ongoing process, never completed. But France has committed resources to this maintenance, recognizes the Mont as a national treasure, treats it with appropriate seriousness. Walking away from Mont Saint-Michel, looking back across the bay at the silhouette of the island, you carry with you the memory of stone and tide, of human ambition and natural power, of a place that exists at the intersection of earth and water, of the possible and the impossible. The Mont is many things: a church, a fortress, a village, a tourist site, a work of art, a feat of engineering, a symbol of France, a UNESCO World Heritage Site. But perhaps most fundamentally, it is simply a place, a specific arrangement of stone on a granite rock in a tidal bay, a place that humans have found significant for a millennium, a place that continues to mean something, to matter, to draw people across the world to witness it. This is Mont Saint-Michel, the tidal island, the architecture of the quicksands, the Mount of the Archangel, the fortress in the sea, La Merveille, the Gothic dream made stone, the impossible made real. It stands as it has stood, breathes with the tides as it has breathed for eons, waits in the bay for the next tide, the next visitor, the next chapter in its long and extraordinary story. Stone and water, faith and ambition, danger and beauty, history and present, all combined in one remarkable place, one vertical city on a granite rock, one monument to human persistence and the patient power of the sea.
The relationship between Mont Saint-Michel and the quicksands that surround it is more than geographical proximity, it is definitional. The quicksand is not simply a hazard to be avoided, but an integral part of what the Mont means, what it has always meant. Without the quicksand, the bay would be less dangerous, the island less isolated, the achievement of building there less remarkable. The quicksand makes the Mont what it is, a place that required courage to reach, that tested faith, that separated the determined from the cautious, that added an element of mortal peril to what was already a spiritual journey. Understanding quicksand requires understanding its formation, the specific conditions that transform ordinary sand into a trap. The Bay of Mont Saint-Michel provides ideal conditions. Fresh water flows down from the rivers, the Quesnon, the Say, the Sélune, carrying silt and sediment, lowering the salinity of the water. This fresh water meets salt water from the ocean, creating a mixing zone where the chemistry becomes complex. The tidal action moves water up and down through the sand, saturating it, sometimes creating conditions where the water pressure between sand grains is high enough that the grains lose contact with each other, becoming suspended in the water rather than resting on each other. When this happens, the sand loses its solidity. What looks like firm ground is actually a saturated slurry capable of bearing little weight. Step on it and your foot sinks, not because something is pulling you down, but because there is nothing solid to support you. The sand flows around your foot like thick liquid. If you pull straight up, you create suction, making extraction harder. If you thrash and struggle, you drive yourself deeper. The physics are remorseless. The more you fight, the worse your situation becomes. The traditional advice for escaping quicksand is counterintuitive. Relax, spread your weight, move slowly, try to get horizontal, to float, because quicksand is denser than water and will support a human body if properly distributed. Work one leg free slowly, patiently, then the other. It can take minutes or even hours to extract yourself from genuine quicksand, and it requires a calm that is almost impossible to maintain when you can see the tide line approaching, when you know the water is coming and you are stuck. The medieval pilgrims who died in the quicksands of Mont Saint-Michel's bay died not from being swallowed by the sand, but from drowning. They became mired, could not extract themselves quickly enough, and the tide came in and covered them. They died within sight of their destination, within hearing range of the Abbey bells, close enough that people on the Mont could see their struggles, but too far away to help.
The chroniclers record these deaths matter-of-factly, note them as unfortunate but expected, part of the cost of pilgrimage, evidence that reaching Mont Saint-Michel required divine favor as well as human effort. The passeurs, the guides who knew the bay, developed techniques for avoiding quicksand. They carried long staffs that they used to probe the sand ahead, testing for solidity. They learned to read the sand's appearance. Quicksand often has a slightly different color or texture, appears wetter or more uniform than solid sand. They knew the bay's geography intimately, knew where quicksand was likely to form based on the season, the recent weather, the tidal cycle. They planned routes that avoided the most dangerous areas, that kept to firmer ground, that provided escape options if conditions changed. But even the best guides sometimes miscalculated. The bay's conditions shift. Quicksand appears where it was not yesterday. Routes that were safe become treacherous. There are stories of guides and their entire parties being caught, of desperate struggles to free themselves before the tide arrived, of some succeeding and others failing. The profession of passeur was lucrative because it was dangerous, because the knowledge they possessed was literally life-saving, because pilgrims understood that attempting the crossing without a guide was often fatal. The professionalization of the passeur role was sanctioned by both religious and secular authorities. The Abbey granted monopolies to specific families, giving them exclusive rights to guide pilgrims across the bay in exchange for fees and sometimes a portion of the pilgrims' offerings. These families guarded their knowledge jealously, passed it from father to son, created dynasties of guides that lasted for generations. The knowledge was power, was income, was status. A passeur family had standing in the community, had wealth beyond what most coastal peasants could aspire to, had a profession that was respected, if also feared. The causeway, when it was built in 1879, eliminated this profession overnight. No longer did pilgrims need guides to cross the bay. They could simply walk across the raised roadway, safe from tides and quicksand, paying a toll perhaps, but not requiring specialized knowledge or skills. The passeur families lost their monopoly, their livelihood, their reason for existence. Some adapted, became hoteliers or merchants, catering to the new wave of tourists the causeway brought. Others left the region entirely, sought other work, saw their specialized knowledge become obsolete within a generation.
The causeway was progress, certainly, by any conventional measure. It made Mont Saint-Michel accessible to more people, safer, more democratic. No longer did you need wealth to hire a guide or timing to catch low tide. You could visit any time, arrive by carriage or later by automobile, cross quickly and safely. The number of visitors increased dramatically. What had been thousands per year became tens of thousands, then hundreds of thousands, then millions. But something was lost. The journey across the bay had been part of the pilgrimage, part of what made reaching Mont Saint-Michel meaningful. The danger, the quicksand, the tides, these were not just obstacles, but tests, opportunities to demonstrate faith and courage, experiences that transformed the visitor before they ever reached the Abbey. Arriving safely at the Mont after crossing the bay was itself a kind of miracle, a confirmation that you were meant to be there, that divine protection had seen you through. The causeway made the journey trivial. It reduced it to a pleasant walk or a short drive, removed the risk, and with it, the meaning that risk provided. Mont Saint-Michel became easier to reach, but less significant to have reached. The transformation from pilgrimage destination to tourist attraction was accelerated by this infrastructure, by this well-intentioned improvement that fundamentally altered the nature of the experience. The removal of the causeway and construction of the new bridge was partly about restoring tidal flow and preventing siltation, but it was also about restoring something of that lost meaning. The new bridge is elegant, minimal,
designed to be as unobtrusive as possible, and critically, it does not extend all the way to the Mont. The final approach is left exposed to the tides, ensuring that at very high water, the last 100 meters to the island are flooded, are impassable on foot, require waiting for the tide to recede. This is symbolic more than practical. Visitors can wait an hour or two for the tide to drop if they arrive at the wrong time. It is not a serious impediment, but the symbolism matters. It restores the sense that Mont Saint-Michel is an island, that reaching it requires timing and awareness of the tides, that the sea has power here, that human access is conditional and temporary, granted by the rhythm of the tides rather than guaranteed by infrastructure. Walking across the new bridge at high tide, with water flowing beneath and around, with the Mont rising ahead surrounded by sea, you experience something closer to what the medieval pilgrims experienced. Not the same. The bridge is safe, modern, you are in no danger, but spiritually similar. The island is separate, is surrounded by an element you cannot cross, is accessible only because this slender bridge provides passage. The drama is restored, the sense of approaching something set apart, something that exists in both the geographical world and in some other register, some space between mundane and sacred. The tides themselves are the other actor in Mont Saint-Michel's story, as important as the stone, as definitive as the architecture. The bay's tides are driven by the gravitational pull of the moon and sun, the same forces that create tides everywhere on Earth, but the specific geography of the bay amplifies them. The English Channel funnels tidal water into the bay. The shallow slope causes the water to spread across a vast area, and the result is tidal ranges among the largest in the world. The cycle is predictable: 2 high tides and 2 low tides per day, with the timing shifting by about 50 minutes daily as the moon orbits Earth. But the magnitude varies dramatically based on the positions of the sun and moon. Spring tides, when sun and moon align, produce the highest highs and lowest lows. Neap tides, when sun and moon are at right angles to each other, produce smaller tidal ranges. And the specific conditions, wind, atmospheric pressure, the season, all affect the actual water levels on any given day. The medieval monks tracked the tides carefully, developed tables and predictions, understood the patterns. They had to. Their survival depended on it. Supplies arrived by boat at high tide. Communication with the mainland was easier when water surrounded the island and boats could dock. The monks became amateur oceanographers, students of the sea that surrounded their home, developing knowledge that was both practical and, in its way, spiritual. The tides were God's rhythm, the breath of creation, a manifestation of divine order in the physical world. The speed of the incoming tide is what makes it dangerous. At 10 kilometers per hour, a person can run faster, briefly, but you cannot sprint for long, and the tide does not tire. On a flat bay floor with few landmarks, it is easy to misjudge how far you are from safety, how much time you have. You think you can make it, think you can reach the Mont or reach shore before the water arrives, and then you realize you cannot. Realize the water is coming faster than you anticipated, and panic sets in. The accounts from various centuries describe people caught by the tide, describe their attempts to outrun it, describe the moment that they realize they cannot reach safety, describe them wading and then swimming and then drowning as the water deepens. Some were saved by boats launched from the Mont or from shore, by rescuers who rowed out into the advancing tide and pulled people from the water. Others were not saved, were lost, were found later washed up on the shore or never found at all.
The bay also contains rivers, the Couesnon most prominently, but also the sea and Saloon. These rivers create channels across the tidal flats, places where water runs even at low tide, deeper water that must be forded or bridged.
The Couesnon, in particular, wanders across the bay, its course shifting over time as sediment deposits and erosion alter its path. At different periods in history, the Couesnon flowed on different sides of Mont Saint-Michel, and this mattered legally. The river was historically the border between Normandy and Brittany, so which side of the river the Mont sat on determined which province it belonged to. There was a saying, "Le Couesnon en sa folie a mis le Mont en Normandie." The Couesnon, in its madness, put the Mont in Normandy. The river's course had shifted, placing Mont Saint-Michel on the Norman side, and this was seen as fortunate because Normandy was more powerful, more capable of protecting and developing the site. Had the river placed it in Brittany, the Mont's history might have been quite different. The river channels are dangerous in their own way. They look like they should be fordable, but the current can be strong, the water deeper than it appears, the bottom unstable. People attempting to cross at low tide sometimes found themselves swept away, carried by the current into deeper water, drowned despite being within sight of land on both sides. The passers knew where the channels could be safely forded, where bridges or boats were necessary, but someone attempting the crossing alone might not know, might make a fatal error. The wildlife of the bay is part of its ecology and its character. Seabirds, gulls, terns, oyster catchers feed on the tidal flats, probe the sand for invertebrates, ride the wind above the water. Herons stand in the shallows, patient and motionless, waiting for fish. At low tide, the bay is alive with birds, a feeding ground that supports large populations of species that depend on intertidal zones. There are also seals occasionally, and dolphins have been spotted in the deeper channels. The bay is part of a larger marine ecosystem connected to the English Channel and the Atlantic beyond. Fish move with the tides, come into the bay to feed, retreat with the water. Shellfish, mussels, cockles, oysters thrive in certain zones, are harvested commercially, provide livelihoods for people in the coastal towns. The vegetation of the tidal flats is sparse but specialized. Salt-tolerant plants grow in areas that are regularly inundated, creating patches of green in the gray and brown sand. These plants stabilize the sand to some degree, their roots binding the sediment, creating slightly higher ground that floods less frequently. Over time, these raised areas can develop into salt marsh, which in turn can gradually become dry land as sediment continues to accumulate. The process is slow, geological in timescale, but it operates constantly, and over centuries it changes the geography of the bay. Historically, there was more marsh and less open water in parts of the bay. Medieval maps show areas that were marshy or occasionally dry that are now permanently underwater, and vice versa. The bay is not static. It evolves, responds to changes in sea level and sediment supply and human intervention. The construction of the causeway changed it dramatically, accelerating siltation, altering flow patterns. The removal of the causeway and installation of the dam and bridge is now changing it again, pushing it back toward a more natural state, though natural is a complicated concept in a landscape that has been shaped by human activity for over 1,000 years. The monks of Mont Saint-Michel were not just passive inhabitants of their island, they actively shaped the landscape around them. They built seawalls, they managed the marshlands, they constructed polders, land reclaimed from the sea by building dikes and draining the water. They channelized rivers. Some of this work was purely practical, creating agricultural land or protecting existing structures, but some of it was ambitious, was landscape engineering on a large scale, was an attempt to control and modify the environment rather than simply adapting to it. These modifications had consequences, some intended and some not. Polders created farmland but also altered drainage patterns. Seawalls protected specific areas but sometimes increased erosion elsewhere. River channelization reduced flooding but changed sediment deposition. The monks were not thinking in terms of ecosystem management or environmental impact. These concepts did not exist in their intellectual framework, but they were nonetheless modifying complex natural systems, and those systems responded in ways that were not always predictable or desirable. The modern restoration of tidal flow around Mont Saint-Michel is in some ways a reversal of these medieval modifications, an acknowledgement that the human impulse to control nature can have unintended consequences, that sometimes the best management is to allow natural processes to operate with minimal interference. The dam and bridge system is sophisticated, represents advanced engineering, but its goal is to mimic and support natural tidal dynamics rather than to overcome them, to work with the bay's natural rhythms rather than against them. The experience of visiting Mont Saint-Michel today is layered, complex, sometimes contradictory. You approach across the bridge, and the view is magnificent. The island rising from the bay, the Abbey silhouetted against the sky, the Gothic spires pointing upward. It is genuinely beautiful, genuinely impressive, even if you have seen it in countless photographs. The physical presence, the scale, the drama of the setting, these are not diminished by familiarity.
But then you reach the island and enter the village, and the experience shifts. The street is crowded, lined with tourist shops selling tchotchkes, filled with people speaking dozens of languages, everyone with cameras and phones, documenting rather than experiencing. The medieval atmosphere is present but muted, overlaid with commercial modernity, with the infrastructure of mass tourism. You are one visitor among thousands on this particular day, among millions annually, part of a vast flow of people through a place that was designed for dozens, maybe hundreds. The Abbey itself retains more of its dignity. The entrance fee limits numbers somewhat. The spaces are large enough to absorb crowds without feeling entirely overwhelmed, and the architecture speaks for itself. The Romanesque solidity of the nave, the Gothic elevation of the choir, the impossible beauty of the cloister. Even surrounded by other tourists, even reduced to standing in queues to enter specific rooms, the building impresses, demands attention, rewards careful observation. If you visit off-season, if you arrive early or late, if you choose your moment carefully, you can find relative solitude. Stand in the cloister at opening time on a January morning before the tour groups arrive, and you might have the space nearly to yourself. The silence is profound, broken only by wind and distant bird calls. The stone columns frame views of the bay, of the sky, of the impossible void that the cloister hangs above. In such moments, the Mont reveals something of what it must have been like for the monks, for whom this space was not a tourist destination, but a home, a workplace, a setting for daily life lived in pursuit of divine connection. The villages on the mainland that surround Mont Saint-Michel have their own relationship with the island, have economies that depend on it, identities defined by proximity to it. Pontorson, Le Mont Saint-Michel Commune, Beauvoir, these towns provide parking, hotels, restaurants, services for the millions of visitors. They are economically dependent on the Mont, and this creates both opportunities and constraints. The opportunities are obvious. Tourism brings money, creates jobs, supports businesses. The constraints are less visible but equally real. The town's development is shaped by tourism, limited by preservation regulations, subject to fluctuations in visitor numbers that are beyond local control. When a pandemic or economic downturn reduces tourism, these communities suffer disproportionately because their economy is so specialized, so dependent on a single attraction. There is also a cultural tension. The people who live in these mainland communities have grown up with Mont Saint-Michel as part of their landscape, their heritage, their identity. But they also see it constantly through the lens of tourism, see it as a commodity, as the thing that brings the crowds and the traffic and the economic activity.
This dual vision of the Mont as both sacred heritage and economic resource can create a complicated relationship, a mixture of pride and resentment, appreciation and frustration. Some longtime residents speak of a time before mass tourism, when the Mont was less crowded, less developed, more theirs. This is nostalgia, perhaps, selective memory that emphasizes the positive and forgets the negative. But it reflects a real loss, the loss of a relationship with the Mont that was more direct, less mediated by tourism infrastructure, more personal. The causeway brought prosperity, but also brought the crowds that made the Mont feel less like a local treasure and more like international property, something that belongs to everyone and therefore to no one in particular. The monks who returned to Mont Saint-Michel in 2001, the monastic fraternities of Jerusalem, navigate this complex environment carefully. They maintain a religious presence, celebrate Mass, keep the liturgical hours, but they do so in a space that is also a museum, a tourist destination, a national monument. Their religious practice is observed by tourists, photographed, sometimes treated as performance rather than genuine devotion. This must be challenging, must require a particular kind of spiritual discipline, an ability to maintain focus and sincerity in conditions that are far from the contemplative isolation that monasticism traditionally seeks. But perhaps there is also something appropriate about this visibility, this public nature of their religious practice. Medieval monks were not as isolated as popular imagination sometimes suggests. Monasteries were economic centers, pilgrimage destinations, places of interaction with the broader world. The monks of Mont Saint-Michel have always lived their religious life in a space that was also political, economic, military. The current situation, where religious and tourist uses overlap, is perhaps not as new or as alien as it might seem. The question of authenticity haunts tourist destinations, especially historical sites. Is Mont Saint-Michel authentic? It is certainly old. Portions of the structure date to the 11th century, indisputably medieval. But it has also been restored, rebuilt, modified over centuries. The cloister you walk through is partly original and partly 19th century reconstruction. The village buildings are a mix of periods, some medieval, some Renaissance, some 19th century. The whole site is maintained, cleaned, repaired constantly. Necessary work to prevent deterioration, but also work that creates a version of the Mont that is cleaner, more intact, more perfect than it ever was historically.
Is this a problem? Does it diminish the site's value or meaning? These are philosophical questions without definitive answers. Some purists argue that only perfectly preserved, unrestored structures have full historical authenticity, that any restoration is falsification, creates a simulacrum rather than preserving a reality. Others argue that maintenance and careful restoration are necessary, that allowing structures to decay in the name of purity is itself a choice that changes them, that some level of intervention is inevitable and appropriate. Mont Saint-Michel has been lived in, used, modified continuously for over 1,300 years. It has never been a pristine artifact. Each generation has made changes, has adapted the structures to their needs, has left their mark. The buildings we see today are palimpsests, layers of history written over each other, each era visible if you know where to look. This layering is perhaps more authentic than any single period snapshot would be. It reflects the reality that buildings are not static, that they evolve with their users, that they are processes rather than objects. The future will add more layers. Climate change will affect the bay, will alter tidal patterns and storm frequencies, may require new defenses or adaptations. Tourism will continue to pressure the site, will require ongoing management and possibly new restrictions. Technology will change how people experience and document their visits. Each of these developments will leave marks, will change the Mont in small or large ways, will add to the accumulated history. And the stone will endure. Granite is among the hardest rocks, resistant to weathering, capable of lasting millions of years.
The granite core of Mont Saint-Michel will outlast the buildings constructed on it, will outlast the current coastline and bay configuration, will persist through whatever changes the future brings. When human civilization has passed, when the Abbey has collapsed and the village has crumbled, when perhaps the bay itself has changed beyond recognition due to geological processes or sea level change, the granite rock will still be there, a small prominence in whatever landscape has formed, waiting perhaps for whatever intelligence comes next to notice it, to wonder about it, to build upon it. But that is deep time, time beyond human concern or planning. For the foreseeable human future, Mont Saint-Michel will persist much as it is, a medieval abbey on a tidal island, a tourist destination and pilgrimage site, an architectural masterwork and national symbol, a place where stone and tide interact in ways that have fascinated people for over a millennium and will continue to fascinate for centuries to come. The bells of the Abbey ring daily, calling the hours, marking time as they have for centuries. The tides rise and fall on their eternal rhythm, twice daily, reshaping the bay, surrounding the island, and then releasing it. Visitors come and go, millions of individual journeys to this single destination, each person carrying away their own experience, their own memories, their own understanding of what Mont Saint-Michel means. This is Mont Saint-Michel, the tidal island, the architecture of the quicksands, the mount of the Archangel, the vertical city, La Merveille, the fortress that never fell, the prison that became a monument, the island that breathes with the tides. It is stone anchored to granite, reaching toward heaven, surrounded by water and sand and danger, accessible and isolated, ancient and constantly renewed, French and universal, sacred and secular, tourist destination and genuine marvel. It stands in the bay, rises from the flats, catches the light, draws the eye, holds history in its stones and meanings in its spaces, remains what it has always been, extraordinary, improbable, necessary, irreplaceable, one of humanity's most remarkable achievements, one single place among all places that manages to be both itself and more than itself, both building and symbol, both location and legend, Mont Saint-Michel.